Welcome to Improving Human Geography Data for Human Security Mapping. My name is Justin Sharon. I'm a principal at Booz Allen, and it's a real honor to be here. On behalf of the panelists, we want to thank all of you for attending and the US GIF for the opportunity to engage with all of you on human geography data and mapping efforts, focused on content, context, and conveyance for human security. It's our honor and privilege today to have the director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, Mr. Robert Cardillo. Sarah, on day one of GEOINT, you provided insights on new power and unveiled the updated NGA strategy. On day two, you allowed all of us to sit through a team huddle with your senior staff. And here on day three, we're honored to have you as part of as members of the human geography community and part of your team GEOINT. At the beginning of the month, you provided opening remarks to the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group Climate and Human Security Symposium. It was attended by over 300 people in person and virtual. And today, on behalf of the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group leadership, Mr. Brian Hagan and Dr. Lee Schwartz, we want to present you with a signed poster from the symposium.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I was one of the virtual participants. Yes, right.
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
For your support.
All right.
So with that, we'd like to have a warm welcome for Director Cardillo. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Brian. Boy, in many ways, this week has flown by. In many ways, it feels like we've been here for much longer than 3 days. But I say that in a good way because this is just such an enriching experience for me, for my workforce, for our partners that are attending here today and that are on this panel. I'm big on clarity and crispness in my demand signal for my workforce. And I really think the best thing that I could offer you all at the beginning of this seminar is to finish, because it's the experts on the panel that you really need to hear from. But I won't just do that, because I got the signed poster and all that and feel like I owe a little bit more. But the central purpose to my opening remarks is to express my appreciation for and my dependence upon the expertise, the methodology, the professionalism that you all will hear, and I presume many in the audience practice as well. And I'll use just a couple of examples. Oftentimes when I'm inviting a new person to NGA headquarters and they're not quite up to speed on all things geospatial intelligence or even mapping, charting, and geodesy, I like to take the map of the Middle East, or Africa works equally as well, but take those Rand-McNally borders off. And it does two things. One, it disturbs them. Well, wait, that doesn't look right. Where are those, sharp corners that I use to frame my thinking about this country or this crisis? Where are the names that I'm familiar with? The ones that were assigned a generation or 2 or 5 ago. But then it begins the second part, which is the conversation about, okay, so we've taken the Rand-McNally lines off. Now we have to engage in the problem, the challenge, the threat, the opportunity, the risk, the instability, etc., in a way that, yes, eventually we need to put those lines back on because, yes, the world does still operate at some level with those lines as significant points of interest, points of law, etc. But I find it more helpful to when you can take the lines off, you get to the level of about the human engagement with that geography. Just a quick aside, I happened to be attending a young professionals group session. It actually wasn't here, it was a week or two ago. And was just introducing myself around the room. And I met a young man, and I said, what do you do? How do you play? What's your role? And he said, well, I have a new company. I'm employee number 2. I says, well, what's your company's value proposition? And he said, we offer emotional geography assessments. And I went, you do what? And he said, emotional geography assessments. I go, I'm not even sure I know what you're talking about. And he translated for me, sentiment, and attitudes and perspectives and leanings. And I said, oh, okay, I'm catching up with you now. But I came back to the term and I just loved it because, one, I hadn't heard it, and you would think somebody in my business might get around and hear things, and you're employee number 2, and how many employees behind you? He says 1. Oh, so you're a team of 3, yep, and we're going to turn 1 year next, month. But what I loved about it was that there's such rich inspections and studies and assessments going on, and it really is elevating. I will not go back to the Greek here, but it really is elevating the ancient, reality that we all deal with, which is we're all just in one way, shape, or form interacting with our environment, trying to make our way through the day, occasionally trying to have and raise a family, trying to create some sense of stability around that dynamic, dealing with governments, dealing with non-governments, dealing with social issues and religious issues, etc. And I think we've been doing that for, and I'll get the years wrong, 100,000 years. So anyway, my way to say that I think we've underplayed the contribution of what you're about to discuss. I commit, as the director of NGA, to be a stronger demand signal on what you're about to hear. And so I guess the agreement I'd like to have with you and the panel and the audience is that I'm determined to pull and prod and poke, but I need you all to keep pushing and presenting and offering solutions, or at least paths to solutions, because I know the world isn't as neat as we'd always like it. So with that, like I said, I'm just most appreciative of being able to be here. I'll step out of the way. I'll turn it over to the panel, and I will learn with the rest of you. So thank you all very much. Thanks. Thanks.
Sarah, thank you for the commitment and your remarks and your leadership in this area. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our world-class panelists. First is Mr. Brian Hagan. He is NGA's National Geospatial Intelligence Officer for Geography and Cartography. Next to him is Ms. Nicole Spinagle, and she is the Chief of the Defense Intelligence Agency's Operational Environment Analysis Division. Next to her is Dr. Melinda Latourie. She is a Jefferson Science Fellow at the State Department's Humanitarian Information Unit. Next to her is Mr. Godfrey Takavarasha, and he is the Data Manager for the Humanitarian Data Exchange at the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Next to Godfrey is Dr. Leah Shanley, and she's affiliated with the University of Wisconsin at Madison and a NASA Presidential Innovation Fellow. And next to you, Dr. Shanley, is Mr. Mike Williams. He is now the director of the University of South Florida's Global Initiative for Civil Society and Conflict. And what we've got this afternoon is each panelist is going to provide a short presentation, and then we want to have time so that we can have a QA session and have this very engaging and interactive. So with that, I'm going to go off and I will be collecting questions down here in the front, and I'm going to turn it over. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Mr. Brian Hagan.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks. Greetings. Thank you all so much for being here. Sure appreciate it. What I'm going to try to do over the next 8 to 10 minutes or so is to give you a snapshot of where we're at with our Human Geography program at NGA. Talk about some of our partnerships, talk about our way forward, talk about some of the work that is human geography related going on across NGA. So thanks again for being here. You know, Mr. Cardillo gave, I think, a great description of human geography standing up here. Really, we're talking about mapping of human patterns and presence and activity and how that, within its environment. Huge kind of aspect of geospatial intelligence right now. I like to think of it as it's the kind of stuff that we can't really see on overhead imagery, right? We can't see people's ethnicity. We can't tell what language they speak from satellite imagery. We can't tell what religious sect they belong to. We can't tell a lot of demographic information about people. So this makes it challenging to be able to capture or collect and map and overlay with other types of spatial information. So it's unique kind of data that really provides us great opportunity to add context and information to our geospatial data that we're trying to provide to our customers. This slide you're looking at right now shows that this activity is homeroomed in the source directorate in the Office of Geography, but it doesn't take long to start looking at human geography and start to overlay that with other layers of geospatial information to realize that it can't be just within the source directorate at NGA. It's our analysis directorate, it's our Innovision directorate. Everybody who has anything to do with contributing to geospatial products and information and research across NGA uses human geography and is impacted by it. And that just seems to become more and more evident as time goes on as well. This slide here, I'm going to try to have you take home the fact that human geography really underpins a lot of the information and data that NGA is trying to provide its customers right now. Mr. Cardillo has mentioned on several occasions the Ebola crisis and the Nepal crisis. Human geography was critical in our support for Ebola. It was important in many aspects, one of which was understanding the religious sects of the people involved who were coming into contact with the virus, because there's different burial rituals that each of the groups had over there, and that impacted the way the disease was spread. They laid hands on the deceased in certain rituals over there. Well, it just so happens that Ebola was at its most spread most actively shortly after a person had deceased. So it was critical for us to understand that, so we could map that, educate on that, and also overlay that with other critical geospatial information like population density data that we got from Oak Ridge National Laboratories, and then understanding the climate patterns and the rain and the dry season that was getting ready to come up, knowing that people were going to become mobile. So when we had that information and we mapped that with population and we mapped that with some of the cart track and footpath and road network, we could then determine where potentially and where to add hospitals and nursing facilities, et cetera, as people began to migrate. And if you look at our current activities in the Middle East, Mr. Cardillo pretty much said it. You take off the lines on a map, right? So it's impossible for us to conduct our operations over there in an effective manner if we don't understand the religious activity, the religious sects people belong to, the ethnicity, the language that they speak. It's important to know the loyalties of different clans and tribes, of different people. It's important to know if a group comes into a certain area and takes over a city, what kind of people are leaving that city and where are they going, and how's that going to be from a refugee perspective, and who's left in that city that are going to have to live together. So understanding those human dynamics has been critical for us in NGA in our current effort, and it's going to continue to be more so. Another big one that we made reference to earlier was the climate. It's important for us to understand that as well as we look closer and closer at the Arctic. Okay, Thad Allen said in his talk the other day, he said, hey, look, I don't really take a stance on global warming. I just know that there's water now where there didn't used to be water. Same can go for the Arctic. There's people transversing the Northwest Passage later and later in the winter season than has ever been done before. Well, what's that creating? That's creating changes in patterns of behavior. It's creating shipping changes and the like. So NGA is focused on that area, and we're very interested in that area. And it's causing continued drought in Africa. Well, what's that causing? That's causing water shortages, food shortages, and we have to understand that and know that and try to spatially and temporally depict that, okay, so that we can understand maybe where our next pitfalls are in Africa. And so understanding those things and putting that human geography context into as a critical layer or layers in our geospatial information is critical. You heard John Gogasian and Gary Dunau from NGA talking about ABI, activity-based intelligence, yesterday at the pavilion. And human geography works perfectly in that environment because it adds context and it takes a product or a point, an object that NGA is trying to understand and be able to put it in its context and understand from a spatial and a temporal aspect what's happening around that object and what might happen in the future and what information is important for our policymakers to understand as we continue to look at that situation. So again, human geography plays a critical role. Mr. Cardillo also mentioned in his keynote about NGA Pathfinder, total open source environment where we're trying to become more open and transparent, right? But we're putting some key questions and topics out there to try to solve them just from an open source perspective. And human geography and open source, as you all know and will know, go hand in hand. And so that's really where the plethora of data is for open source. So I see human geography playing a key role as we go forward in the Pathfinder effort. Robert also talked about one of the goals is partnerships and Team GEOINT. And we've tried diligently over the last year and a half, 2 years to expand those partnerships. We got a great partnership with Lee Schwartz and the State Department, and you're gonna hear one of our speakers here, Melinda, talk a little bit about one of the projects we're working with them on, the Humanitarian Information Unit we work closely with on human geography efforts. So really us and state are really linked very closely. Census Bureau, we're establishing relationships with Census Bureau to try to sustain some of the excellent demographic skills that they have down there and helping us go out and gather census information, because human geography, as complex as it can be sometimes and as hard to geospatially depict, it's also hard to get current critical information. So we're counting on the census to help us do that. We work closely with our combatant commands. AFRICOM and SOCOM and CENTCOM are very active in human geography. So basically, NGA can't be the only entity that does human geography. We're just trying to understand who's doing what, so we don't duplicate effort, and we're wise. We spend taxpayer dollars wisely, and so we're trying to understand that so we can share better. We're doing great work with our international partners, with the DGC in the UK, and with the BGIC, our German partners that are here as well. So lots of international activity through the Allied Operations Forum. We have a human geography subgroup that is doing some great work together on some joint projects that we're working. Great partnerships. Justin Sharon up here from WWHGD has been critical in setting up the whole worldwide human geography data activity in the geo platform that's out there for us to share. Thad Allen mentioned WWHGD in his talk as well. So been a critical aspect for us to be able to work with many of the partners that are here today who've populated the worldwide human geography data platform to be able to share data. Another cool relationship we have is with academia. The Washington College folks have a booth downstairs. If you haven't had a chance, stop in there and see Stu Bruce. They're doing some great work on megacities, okay? And our own Doug Batson in our Office of Geography co-wrote a paper that was a runner-up for the Galileo Award on some of his megacity work. And megacities is huge. It's a huge issue that we, and from a human geography perspective, have to face. It's estimated that 200,000 people per day are migrating from rural Arab regions to urban regions. 200,000 a day. So if you do the math, that's the equivalent of 2 Tokyo Japans being created every year in the world. And as that continues to escalate and the populations continue to grow and drought continues in Africa, that's going to continue to be a problem. And NGA is going to have to focus on that, because these vast urban areas of poverty and slums and poor infrastructure is a haven for non-state actors and terrorists, and not to mention what a humanitarian effort would look like in a place like that. So it's important from a human geography perspective that NGA understands that. We can overlay that data with other information and put that in context and understand what's going on there. So partnerships with academia have been great. We got a great CRADA with Washington College. We also have worked greatly with the students at Mercyhurst College as well. Data sharing, critical, okay? Human geography is sometimes very complex, okay? It comes in all shapes and sizes. It comes in census reports. It comes in Word documents. It comes in spreadsheets. It comes in photos from Flickr. It comes from photos from Facebook. And so it's been a challenge over the years to try to standardize the language, develop common data dictionaries, and we finally gotten to a place where we've just developed and produced an operational schema for the top 5 themes, 13 themes of human geography, and nailed down some of those sub-themes so we can all talk the same language. If I'm calling something a tribe and the DIA is calling the same thing a clan, and we're never going to meet. So now we've finally developed a process and some application here where we can actually start sharing data and having our customers and partners outputting some of this data in the same structures and formats so we can actually make it searchable, discoverable, and actionable. So that's been a big challenge for us on that. I mentioned the DIA. Nicole Spinagle is going to speak after me. Her and I are co-chair the sociocultural analysis activity, IPT, the integrated process team. Great way in which we've sent out data calls across the IC to try to gather information on whatever topic comes across the day. And I mentioned before the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group, huge on sharing. Justin, Lee Schwartz and I from State are co-chairs of that. Justin Sharon and his team have run that, and it was critical, such a pivotal platform for us to get our data on the web for Ebola and Nepal. They were responsible for probably 75 to 80% of the data that went out there came through the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group. And so, so they're pivotal in us being able to share data in the open and be transparent with our data and make it available to as many people as possible. From a tradecraft perspective, we're trying to do a lot of things in NGA. We've developed a couple of computer-based training classes, and we are working with our human development group to also build should be done by the end of this year, a week-long instructor-led human geography class. And another big kudo for our tradecraft is we've also getting ready. A lot of work's been done, but we're going to be doing certification. Okay, so lots of certification process. The USGIF has one. NGA has just implemented a broad certification program and then doing deep dives on some of our specific topics, and one of which is human geography. So by the end of this year, community-wide, because this wasn't an NGA thing, we had lots of outside support on this. You'll be able to take a human geography, you'll be able to become certified as a human geographer in the community. So we're real pleased about that. Next slide, please. I'm getting ready to finish here. We talked a little bit, human geography is not all about religion and tribe and ethnic and language and demographic. Climate, water, food are all important aspects of human geography. We've conducted some symposiums recently that have been, I think, a great success. From a water symposium last year, we just finished a climate and human security symposium, which Mr. Cardillo gave a video message for. Judge Alice Hill from the White House was there. Very good. And then we're coming up this fall at NCE. We're going to be doing a food security one, looking at the importance of understanding what's going on across the globe from a food security standpoint so we can understand what might be in store from an intelligence perspective and a humanitarian perspective as potential droughts increase and food shortages and food wars, et cetera. So we're excited about that coming up in the fall. So with that, I know we're taking questions at the end, but I would like to now turn the stage over to Nicole Spinagle from DIA.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Brian mentioned, we're working very closely with our NGA counterparts and with the community writ large on human geography / sociocultural analysis. This is definitely a growth area that the community has been experiencing. And what I would like to present you is with a particular project that actually came out of the SCA IPT that Brian just mentioned, that collaboration, the community of interest that has been established a couple of years ago to tackle more effectively and systematically not only the data sharing aspect, but also the analytic challenges that sociocultural analysis / human geography present. One of the key aspects that we're tackling is anticipatory analysis. That is definitely a challenge. Getting ahead of the crisis. That is the focus that this particular project is basically taking on. What I wanted to share with you are a couple of assumptions. Clearly, everybody here probably has been exposed to some model or framework or tool for anticipatory analysis. So clearly, there are many ways to attack this particular problem set, but just to give you a sense of how we grounded this project that, as I mentioned, comes out of the SCA IPT, some of the key assumptions that we took on. So for example, as Brian mentioned, and the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group has exemplified, there's a wealth of data out there. The challenge is how do we maneuver this data effectively? So our philosophy basically is one needs an analytic framework in order to make sense of the data. What indicators to emphasize, what indicators may not be as helpful in anticipating a particular intelligence problem set. The other aspect that we're emphasizing is empirical case studies. We have a lot to learn from the various crises, and there are quite a few of them ongoing. How do we capture these lessons learned, and how does that inform our analytic framework? So for instance, a common case study is the Arab Spring, and that also informed what we're working on in the concept of seismic. What we identified was a gap in terms of the bottom-up indicators. Societies and culture are very difficult dimensions to measure, if you will. So how can we actually go about systematically tracking societal indicators that give us a sense of which countries are doing well and which countries are going down a troublesome path? So this focus on the bottom-up indicators and systematically monitoring them on an annual basis is frankly a new approach for us, a new challenge. And finally, our assumption was that socioeconomic conditions tend to shift very gradually. By the time the crisis erupts, it makes it look like a very dramatic event. As a matter of fact, though, the stage for the crisis has been set probably in many cases over the course of years, and it's very difficult to pick up these gradual shifts. So what we're doing to address this particular challenge is look at it from a global perspective and a regional perspective, to have a global baseline that allows us to detect these shifts and trends and to measure them more systematically. Here's an overview of what seismic represents. Basically, it's global coverage. It looks at 179 countries on an annual basis. It systematically tracks these countries, and we're identifying those areas that we deem as susceptible to societal unrest based on the empirical case studies that inform the analytic framework that we're applying. Two of the main categories that we're focusing on are a government's resilience. That is measured basically by how concentrated the power is within the hands of a few within a government. So the more highly concentrated the power, the hypothesis is the less able the government, less able / willing the government may be to address catalytic events that are taking place in the country. The other aspect is resources. Again, from a societal perspective, we're looking at what is the food availability, what is the water access, socioeconomic opportunities, ability to participate in the political process, as well as demographic challenges that a particular country experiences. Those two categories overlaid really inform our analytic framework, and this gives you a global snapshot of the different areas of responsibility, regional areas, and how well they rank on these given dimensions. Again, the main value of this is basically to provide analysts with a global baseline to allow them to detect subtle trends that occur within a country as compared to the region or the rest of the world writ large. Once we identify these countries, we actually use these indicators as a way to dive more deeply into a country or a specific subnational area within a country. That is to say, our macro approach is simply to identify which countries should be warranting closer focus. The in-depth subject matter expertise is still very country-specific that we then leverage against those areas of interest. This is a regional overview, just 2 regions. As I indicated, we're tracking all regions of the world, with the exception of the United States. Just to give you an idea of what you are seeing here, basically we're comparing the Africa and the Asia Pacific region. The countries that you see highlighted in bold font are basically countries that experience not only resilience or resource challenge, but a combination of both. So the theory is that these countries are especially susceptible to any catalytic event. We are not drawing a distinction there between a protest by an individual or a natural disaster or any other sort of challenge to the system. Any catalytic event, these countries that are highlighted in bold print are especially susceptible for the reasons I just gave. The less comprehensive view are the other countries of interest. Here we're tracking particular trends. We have found that the level of oppression, for instance, is a very interesting trend to monitor. So what this means is that Libya, for example, has experienced the greatest increase in oppression from 2013 to 2014 when compared to other countries in the world. That's significant. We certainly all knew that Libya was not doing well, but if you put it suddenly in this global context, it gives you an idea of the magnitude of that shift. Similarly, Malawi, and I think China was one of those as well, had the largest increase in corruption. And this actually gave rise to an interesting hypothesis for us. It's like, does actually the investigation of corruption foster the perception of corruption? That is to say, for instance, in China, the commonly held notion is that the local officials, maybe even the provincial officials, are corrupt, but not Beijing. However, now that Beijing is actually looking at high-level party officials and prosecuting them for corruption, does that mean that it actually is fostering the perception that corruption is far more widespread in the population's view than it previously did? A hypothesis, nothing that we can necessarily point to, but an indication of how an analytic framework like this can actually generate new ideas, new questions to explore. Freshwater availability, as Brian indicated, freshwater availability is a key factor that we're keeping track of. My division was instrumental in writing the NIE on water security, of which also an unclassified version is available. So freshwater availability plays a central role writ large in the human geography world and also in our analytic framework. Just to give you also another way of looking at the data, when you look at these regions, what you can see is that, for example, both in Africa and in Asia, urban growth presents a significant challenge. The countries that we identified have above average, significantly high urban growth rates as measured on an annual basis. And the other striking thing was that I think it was a couple of years ago, actually, there were several articles and studies that highlighted corruption as the new global scourge. And actually, our data seems to verify that. Corruption, not only the perception of corruption, but also a government's ability to control corruption, or should I say inability to control corruption, pretty much unifies all of the regions that we've been tracking. It is a prominent factor that seems to be underpinning dynamics in a cross-regional fashion. And with this, I just would like to leave you with one analogy that may add to why we're doing this. To us, this is kind of like predicting where wildfires are most likely to happen. After the Arab Spring, the community has spent a lot of time looking at the oxygen for a wildfire, which is social media, the fuel that allows these social movements to organize. The fuel source, the catalytic events, we really haven't been able to predict that. But we haven't paid much attention to the fuel conditions, the conditions that allow a spark that may amount to very little in one country, allow another region to completely flare up. That's really the crux of the matter that we're trying to get at with this analytic framework. It's looking at the fuel conditions and allowing us to anticipate where a particular catalytic event could have a disproportionate effect. And with this, I would like to turn it over to the next speaker.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. My talk is going to be about the launch of the State Department Office of Geographer's flagship field-based project that's called Mapping Secondary Cities for Resilience, Human Security, and Emergency Preparedness. And I'll focus on an aspect of this project, which is the role of participatory mapping for secondary cities. So first of all, what are secondary cities? How many of you know? Any thoughts? Okay, well, I guess I'll tell you. Secondary cities can be determined by a number of different characteristics. We can look at it in terms of population, size, function, the economy. We can use the population that can range from 10 to 50% of a country's largest cities, but it's really hard to have a standard definition, as a secondary city in China will be very different from a secondary city in Costa Rica if we're thinking about population. These secondary cities are urban hubs for particular activities such as governance, markets, logistics, production, and they're crucial. These cities will account for the largest share of urban growth in developing countries. They're unique environments in the sense that they're experiencing rapid population growth, they're having unplanned and informal growth patterns. They're really understudied and underexamined places, and they're newly emerging in that they're having a high potential for development patterns there. Let's put this in a little bit different context. So this is a graph that I pulled out of a United Nations World Urbanization Prospects report. And if you focus on the colors that are not red and not purple, you can see that the cities that are between less than 500,000 to 5 million people, these numbers really dwarf the larger 5 million to mega cities categories. So we really see that this is an area that we really need to take a look at. Another example that we can look at is considering this spatially. So this is looking at urbanization in 2014. And this first map shows the smallest cities that are from 300,000 to 500,000 people. We can then add to this the next size cities that are called small cities that are about 500,000 to 1 million people, and add yet another overlay looking at medium-sized cities, 1 million to 5 million, and large cities where we're looking at these 5 million to 10 million. It's this category of cities that we really want to examine, and I think there's a couple of three major things that we want to think about looking at this map. Let me just add to this where the megacities are located. We start to look at this and we can examine how cities disappear and reappear as they're absorbed into larger urban areas. We can see that there's the merger of urban centers into urban regions, creating new environments where we have to think about things like the urban ecology, how will these environments respond to climate change, these kinds of things. And it also illuminates things that have to do with where people live, movement and migration, areas that are depopulated, repopulated, or overpopulated. So what our project is going to do, we're going to take a look at how we might be able to fill in the void for local data. We know that we have lots of good global data on many different types of indicators and categories, but it's at this regional, finer scale level that we really need to access data, and particularly for urban areas. I don't know why this is happening, but. The other tool that we want to use then is participatory mapping, where we will be able to use new tools that will allow us to work with these local communities. So we can use new data collection tools. We know that we have increased interconnectivity, and we also have local mapping activities that all can allow for the co-production of data. I have a feeling this is on a timer that I don't know about. We can also realize that we can use the tools of the Human Geography Working Group to have this work for data generation and use the schemas, as was talked about earlier, to direct how our data collection will proceed. We're going to target for our project Latin America, and we're going to visit Latin America and start a pilot project there. And Latin America is important because it's the most urbanized region of the world. 80% of the region's population live in cities. These are hubs of innovation. They experience high levels of urban sprawl in terms of horizontal development rather than vertical development. You have high levels of urban inequality, and you have these pueblos jóvenes, which is areas that are, have a lot of poverty, inadequate housing conditions, and lack of infrastructure in terms of water, sewage, and electricity. We're going to visit Cusco, Peru, and we've identified this city because it is a secondary city in Peru. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's very important in terms of historic preservation and tourism. In terms of issues with respect to natural disasters, it has a lot of problems with flooding and landslides. It's a migration hub, and it's rapidly changing. So using our partnership with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, we have high-resolution imagery that we'll use to have a partnership and workshop with the local people in Cusco to begin to figure out how we might be able to map these areas that have been under-examined and to start a mapping process based on the human geography themes. So our pilot project is made up of a number of partnerships. So looking at the US State Department and the US Embassy, we've already established a partnership with them. They've been very helpful in laying the groundwork for what we're about to do. We're going to partner with the local universities as well as local government there to do a training workshop in geospatial analysis and data generation, and also working with the Peruvian national government, where we'll be building local data sets that they don't currently have. And also partnering with NGOs and the industry partnerships that have already contributed software and smartphones to be able to make this happen on the ground. So the workshop objectives are things like spatial thinking, developing geospatial skills, collecting data for emergency preparedness, security, and resilience, and depending on the tools of open data, as well as trying to figure out different mechanisms where we can empower local decision makers. The most important part of our project, I think, and where it may be different from other projects where we start to talk about workshops, is that we have a number of post-project activities in place. We want to develop a long-term partnership with the different cities that we go to and make sure that this is a working solution for trying to collect data and to create mechanisms for empowerment. So the teams that we work with this next week when I go down to Peru, we will continue to develop data themes and to share using the GeoNode. We'll continue to have on-site facilitation of data generation. We plan to have technical exchanges via virtual brown bags for regular follow-up with our teams, and to create mechanisms where our partners in Peru can continue to earn badges or recognition and awards for their ability to continue to create data. We'll have a number of benchmarks in terms of having progress reports, and then a number of different mechanisms for reporting back and raising awareness through using Twitter and Facebook and a number of those kinds of tools. And so our project outcomes are really to look at the co-production of new data, to develop these partnerships, to build local capacity, and then through establishing on-site experts there, and to be able to develop these geospatial data layers for these different areas that we need. If we start to assess the results of our project so far, and we are going to do the pilot project next week. We've been developing materials for the last month, and we've developed training materials in both English and Spanish in a very short time frame. We've had excellent support, assistance, and partnering from our embassy, and we're looking forward to see what happens next week to see how we can establish and initiate the pilot project for our office. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the humanitarian data exchange. My name is Godfrey Takawarasha, and I am a data manager with the HDX, as we call it.
The HDX is currently in beta mode. It is an initiative of the United Nations Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The site was launched in July of last year, so we're almost 1 year old. And the objective of the humanitarian data exchange really is to make humanitarian data easy to share, easy to find, and easy to use for analysis. Today, on the HDX side, we have over 1,500 registered users, and we host over 1,800 data sets that are shared through over 170 member organizations. The HDX is about open data. It's an open data platform. And I'm just going to show you what our homepage looked like a couple of weeks ago. So it is an open data platform. And if you go onto the HDX, you will find quite a number of quite a lot of data that's available in accessible data formats such as Excel files and CSV files. But what you'll also find is that there's a very, very good number of geographic data sets in such formats as shape files, KMA files, and GeoJSON files. Unfortunately, we do not at the moment support satellite images, but we've had requests from a lot of organizations to share that, sort of data. The HDX is not only is the data shared openly, the development process behind the website itself is also open. So all of the code and configuration files and everything for the platform is available openly and freely on GitHub. And the site itself is based on an open source platform called CCAN. So sharing data on HDX is a very simple process, which just involves entering a few metadata fields and sharing your data. Users can share data using from a choice of open data licenses, your Creative Commons licenses, your Open Data Commons licenses, or users can specify their own terms. This is important because not all data is can be shared openly in that way. For instance, we have instances of data that cannot be shared with, for instance, for commercial purposes. It is only the data owners only allow the data to be used for humanitarian purposes. We also have one caveat that users cannot share data that contains personally identifiable information or community identifiable information or any data that might put communities or individuals who are involved in humanitarian action at risk. So like with any other website, we have a search page where you can get you can search for data. Just like to show you one of the types of data sets that we have, a special kind of data set which we call an indicator. These are with these types of data, they are actually collected by the HDX themselves from a number of reputable sources such as FAO, UNDP, and they are easy and they can be used to and they're comparable amongst countries. So here on this one, you can see that the North Mariana Island has the highest international migrant stroke in the world. Almost all of the population are migrants in that country. Another interesting page, another interesting data set is this Kibera schools. This is a data set that was shared by one of our organizations from from Nairobi, Kenya. And interestingly, this data itself was collected by the community. It's a community that mapped this data, and it uses an interesting feature on HDX called the Geo Preview feature, where data sets that have a geographic component can just easily be visualized without need for any intervention on the from the users. And this it provides that speed to insight that we'd like to call it, that you can easily see what the data is about. I'd like to quickly move forward to another feature of the humanitarian data exchange, which is that we are moving into, which are called crisis pages, where we provide specialized special pages for data sharing around the crisis. And the first one that we did that on, the most recent example is the Nepal earthquake crisis page. Interestingly, with this one, we were able to set it up within hours of the earthquake happening, and we're able to collect together a couple of data sets shared by the different partners. And one interesting thing is that you find that geographic data, data that has to do with where people are and their conditions in the different places where they are, seems to be makes up quite a good percentage of the data that we have there. So we also did the same earlier on, as some of you would recall, with the Ebola crisis. I will not go into that one as well. One of the things that we are doing now on the HDX to encourage sharing of data by the partners is to introduce branded organization pages. One such example is the WFP custom page that we've just recently launched, and it includes the very interesting visualization of WFP food prices data set. I think it's a quite comprehensive data set with about half a million rows of data, where WFP have been collecting food prices data since the 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. Why are we making branded pages? Oh, here's another example for the OCHA Nepal, which is a sister organization, and it shows a visualization of who is doing what way in the Nepal earthquake. Why it's important for us to offer this sort of service, to encourage organizations to at least to get something, some mileage of some sort for the data that they share through the site. I'm just going to talk just a little bit about the country pages, where we collect information about different countries. This one is for the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you can see over time how the children under 5 mortality rate has been improving in DRC Congo for the past couple of years. And we also do custom country pages, such as in Colombia, where we built a page in collaboration with other partners there in Colombia, that sort of more focused on the issue of IDPs that Colombia is facing. I'm just going to conclude, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the other elements in our in our initiative. The first one, it's pronounced the HEXL, which stands for Humanitarian Exchange Language. It's an initiative meant to standardize how humanitarian partners share data. I would encourage those who are interested in data standards to look at it, because it uses constructs very similar to how hashtags are used in popular social media to identify common themes amongst data sets. So that is another aspect that we are also working on in the HDX. And we also have a data lab in Nairobi that is also working to try and promote open data and open and the sharing of data within the East African region. I will end at this point and just thank you once again for the opportunity to talk to you about the HDX, and I welcome the next presenter. Thank you very much.
So thank you for including me on this panel. My name is Leah Shanley, and before joining NASA, I founded the Commons Lab at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and we focused on social media and crowdsourcing for disaster response and humanitarian relief. Since joining NASA, I'm now working to foster a culture of open innovation, including citizen science and crowdsourcing, within NASA and with federal agencies through the work we're doing in the federal community of practice for crowdsourcing and citizen science. So if you had 100,000 people or even 1 million people to help you with your work, what would you do? Today, thousands to millions of people are contributing in impactful ways through citizen science and crowdsourcing projects around the globe. And in the last couple of years, we've seen an explosion of these kind of approaches within the federal agencies. We've gone from maybe 3 or 4 agencies who've been doing this to 38 agencies are either currently doing projects in this space or thinking about it. So for those who may not be familiar, citizen science is a form of open collaboration where members of the public participate in the scientific process to address real-world problems in ways that may include identifying research questions, collecting and analyzing the data, interpreting the results, making new discoveries, developing technologies and applications, so low-cost instrument and sensors to help us monitor our environment, solving complex problems. It's a form of crowdsourcing, just like crowd mapping. So I'll give you a quick snapshot of some of the projects that have had a really big impact in the last couple of years. So the National Archives has a project called the Citizen Archivist Dashboard. And that coordinates crowdsourcing, tagging of archival records, transcribing historic documents, editing of Wikipedia like blogs. More than 170,000 volunteers to date have indexed upwards of 132 million names of the 1940 census in just 5 months. They're transcribing millions of records. Something that NARA couldn't have done on its own. And one of the interesting projects they have going is called oldweather.org, where members of the public get online, they start transcribing old ship's logs. And the more they transcribe, the higher they go up in the hierarchy of the ship. So I might be a sailor scrubbing the deck the first day, and by the time I'm done, I've gone to first mate or ship's captain. So they're motivating people to volunteer through gamification approaches. And this data has been an important source of data contributing to climate model projections. NOAA's MPing mobile app has collected more than 600,000 ground-based observations that help them verify their weather models. Some of you may be familiar with the National Map Corps under the National Map Program. So to date, this slide is actually a little out of date now. As of today, the upward number is 145,000 members of the public, 145,000 volunteers, so this slide is actually a little bit wrong, have contributed edits to the national map. So they're mapping hospitals, other buildings and structures that are important to the public. Interestingly, they've been very careful about their data quality procedures. So they did some small pilots and then expand outward as they verified their methods. And they're using a Wikipedia-like hierarchy of editors. So first, a volunteer makes the edit, then an advanced volunteer checks that edit, and then they do a sampling-based inspection by the USGS personnel. So in the raw data from volunteers, they go from an 87% accuracy for attribute data and 83% for location to 94 to 100% accuracy after those methods have been employed. Nature's Notebook has been around for quite some time. It's run by the U.S. Phenology Network as part of the USGS and NSF. And that engages amateur and professional naturalists regularly to record observations of plants and animals, including seasonal change, leafing on, leafing off, flowering plants, to generate long-term data sets and help with decision making. So for example, this data could be used to, when do we irrigate our land, manage insects and other pests, when do we do prescribed burning of forests or harvest agricultural crops. So Nature's Notebook hopes that in 5 years, this data could be used to forecast spring several weeks in advance, and within a decade, they hope this data will help us predict spring months in advance. Another great one that's been around for some time is Did You Feel It? So USGS has a website. It's actually been going on for 100 years, first as a paper survey. Earthquake hits, books fall off shelves, or worse things happen. In the US, people could go online, enter their location, enter what they felt, enter the severity of that damage, and so they get a very rapid assessment of the geographic extent and severity, and those maps are used by first responders and for scientific research. In the last couple of years, they've been doing, I'm almost out of time, something called the Tweet Earthquake Dispatch, which allows them to monitor Twitter for the word earthquake in 10 different languages. The threshold is hit, the scientist gets an alert, they check their data. So they're able to find an alert of an earthquake in parts of the world where we don't have dense sensor networks in under 2 minutes, sometimes under 30 seconds, where it might take 20 minutes to pull out of the data. USAID has used crowdsourcing to help clean up their data sets. So in 2012 was one of their first pilots. They had 145 volunteers from GIS Corps and Standby Task Force clean up 10,000 records. You wouldn't think that that would be a very exciting thing, but the volunteers did a great job with 85% accuracy. And EPA is doing some exciting work in low-cost sensors and instrumentation so that communities can monitor their own environmental data, air quality, water availability. So they're developing sensors, they're partnering communities with EPA scientists, they're providing grants, guidance materials, and they're bringing together a larger community of practice that includes the private sector and academic researchers to better develop these tools. So often when you think of crowdsourcing or citizen science, people think of data collection. I challenge you to think beyond that. Yes, you're going to increase your sample size, the density, your geographic density of your measurements, or the temporal density, the geographic extent. But the crowd has also been used to do data analysis. It's being used to solve complex scientific problems in a much shorter time period than perhaps we can through normal traditional methods. And it can be used to validate our research models. We're now seeing advances in technology that are really, I think, going to be game changers. Wearables, for example, are coming on the scene, so will be tremendous for public health studies. There's a group called Propeller Health that has a sensor and a GPS on your asthma inhaler, and now they can create hotspots of where we have air pollution and health issues. So for those of you in the federal government and those of you who would like to connect with the federal government, we have a federal community of practice on crowdsourcing and citizen science. 38 agencies are participating. We share best practices, lessons learned, connect with the research community to see what the emerging technologies and research is. We're also trying to deal with some of the barriers or issues that we need to pay attention to, like privacy, data security. And there's issues of data security that go beyond cybersecurity, that go to cognitive security. So we haven't had too much of this here in the United States, but internationally, issues of people using social media to manipulate the crowd. So I think those are some of the best practices that need to be developed as well. So thank you.
Good. All right, it's a pleasure to be here. So before I get to the who, the what, the why, I'd like to give you a little bit of background, as I believe it will give you context on how this initiative developed and where it's headed. And this is my story from my influence. I've served 15 years in the Department of Defense in various capacities in the intelligence community. Majority of those years were spent at MacDill Air Force Base, home to United States Special Operations Command, and Central Command. Over the last decade, I have established and trained a number of GEOINT-focused interdisciplinary analysis programs nationally and internationally. And this is in support of conflict prevention, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, counterinsurgency, stability and operations, stability and support operations, and counterterrorism efforts. And one of these programs at U.S. Central Command was actually an award winner in 2010 for the Military Achievement Award, which was a great honor. I also concurrently been involved in developing and advancing human geography data standards to maximize interoperability across the whole of government, and that's within the U.S. and abroad. I'd say mostly abroad. As a leader in this domain, I understood very quickly that I needed to deploy to gain valuable insight, experience, and help shape contributions that human geography can make in the campaign in Afghanistan. I've deployed at the tactical level with Special Operations Task Force West, which focused on a bottom-up approach through the village stability operations in support of governance, security, development lines of efforts. I deployed at the operational level with the Marine Corps Cultural Intelligence Teams in Helmand, focused on supporting U.S., Allied, and Afghan units operating in Southwest Afghanistan. And finally, I directed the Civil Military Integration Program for the International Security Assistance Force, or ISAF, for a year at the strategic level. And to my knowledge, this is one of the largest human geography programs that existed, staffed by over 1,000 U.S. government civilian, contractor, and host nation personnel. We're responsible for gathering, analyzing, measuring, mapping, and reporting Afghanistan public perception and sentiment in support of ISAF. However, when I first took over the program, it was largely ineffective, lacked value proposition, and was not making a contribution to the overall campaign. Well, about 6 months into it, I revamped this critical intelligence capability, saving the taxpayers millions of dollars, making it more effective and a valuable contributor to the campaign. That was at the end of the campaign, but there's some serious lessons to be learned here. These experiences really opened up my eyes to how human geography matters and various ways that we can integrate it into the decision-making process at all levels. And in the process, we made significant advances in analytical methods, and we've created fantastic geospatial data sets. Now, during the timeline I just covered, I was also doing a lot of outreach with my alma mater, University of South Florida. This consisted of guest lectures in human geography and other geospatial-related courses, as well as guest speaking with or to the geography senior class. I also was involved in developing a human geography workshop series with the College of Business's National and Competitive Intelligence Program. So in all of my interactions with the University of South Florida, I wanted to bring back lessons learned, best practices in human geography and geospatial science. I wanted to expose students to real-world applications and situations. My lectures and workshop used real-world data from the field. And the power of this interaction was significant. It created a considerable interest and demand. So upon my more recent return from Afghanistan, I wanted to again give back to the University of South Florida. And through a series of meetings, the idea to stand up this initiative was forged. I decided to leave the government and pursue this initiative to fill in some of the gaps that were previously difficult to address and looked within the government and look forward to advancing human geography through the expertise and rigor of academia. I also saw it as a way to work in the open with access to open source data, tools, and technology, which were other constraints that we often faced. So who are we? We are an interdisciplinary group of academics and practitioners from the defense, diplomacy, and development communities. We are professors, sociologists, geographers, statisticians, ethnographers, postdoc research fellows, senior military intelligence professionals, civil military experts, foreign service officers, political advisors, and policy planners. And this is just a sample that should give you an idea of the background and experience we've assembled at GI. We are also a distributed network of functional and geographic experts throughout academia, business, NGOs, and international organizations. Our brain trust exploits its experience of years forging essential peer-to-peer relationships, enabling access to decision makers, information, and resources throughout the Middle East, Africa, and Central Asia. Most importantly, we are students seeking to become leaders in developing key analytical skills and critical thinking skills that are mentored in our program. What do? GEI is a unique interdisciplinary enterprise that reimagines civil society, citizenship, identity, and conflict. We provide tailored research, policy recommendations, and facilitate opportunities for discussion so stakeholders in the local, national, and international communities can make well-informed decisions. Specific projects include studies on Afghanistan, Iraq, and the threat of ISIS, instability in the Middle East, Boko Haram and the dynamics of tribal militant ties in West Africa, and violence and counter-radical narratives among Muslim communities. GEI's research findings have impacted policy and debate at the national and international levels. As an example, our research on conflict in Muslim communities has recently shaped the debate on mosque construction in Europe. Regarding innovation, we've developed a tribalism index, which measures levels of tribalism at the nation-state level. The index allows you to compare tribalism scores across countries based on 5 critical factors, and these include gender inequalities, perceptions of corruption, grievance measures, ethnic and linguistic fractionalization, and population demographics. Now, we've recently improved the scales of space, time, and context for this index, and it has been very successful in predicting levels of violence, support for insurgent groups like Boko Haram, and where the recognized sovereign state will fail to embed at the regional state level. So taking what we've learned from the successful application of the high-definition tribalism index for Nigeria, we are now actively collecting, integrating, and analyzing similar data sets for other countries within the sub-Saharan Africa. Now, regarding research products, we have a bi-monthly report titled Nigeria and Boko Haram Tracker. This product builds on GEI's extensive West Africa work on the conflict with Boko Haram and the broader regional and international dynamics. The work draws on multiple sources and methods and the broader regional and including extensive field research. The tracker considers the governance, security, sociological, and economic dimensions of the conflict and provides analysis for policy, academic, government, media, NGO, and private sector audiences. Our first 2 issues have reached over 10,000 page views by over 3,000 users, and only 43% of the users are US-based. The rest of the world are led by Nigeria and the United Kingdom as users for that product. GEI has conducted an extensive number of workshops and conferences that include tribal dynamics in Africa, Middle East, and South Asia, the transformation of warfare, human trafficking, and the developments in citizenship. We've also partnered with Washington, D.C. think tanks in developing a unique internship opportunity for students who are able to intern from our offices, work across both staffs, leveraging our capabilities within our Global Innovation Lab. Partnerships currently include the Institute for the Study of War, Institute for State Effectiveness, and the American Enterprise Institute. And we continue to seek more partnerships to extend our global orientation and reach. Finally, we've become a leading voice, providing expert commentary on global issues affecting U.S. foreign policy. We've appeared on leading national and international networks and publications, sharing our unique perspectives and cutting-edge research. So why is it important? Just take a look at the UN Refugee Agency's Global Trends Report. Worldwide displacement has hit an all-time high as war and persecution increase. Globally, 1 in every 122 humans is now either a refugee, internally displaced, or seeking asylum. If this were the population of a country, it would be the world's 24th biggest. In the past 5 years, at least 15 conflicts have erupted or reignited. We collectively need to reimagine how we work, how we collaborate, how we share information and knowledge. Something has to change. And I see the global initiative as a catalyst for change, to drive innovation, to drive engagement, to bridge our communities for a better world. So we come to partnerships. We need to extend the workforce. I used to say this in the government all the time when I was working with our allies. We need to share the burden, as this is our collective challenge. Partnerships are essential for success for us all. And as we've heard in previous presentations, this goes far beyond just data. GI has established several memorandums of understanding with defense organizations, and we're actively seeking partnerships with the diplomacy and development communities as well. This past Monday, we got some great news. USF was selected as a Centers of Academic Excellence in the Geospatial Sciences program. We do not take lightly the responsibility to inform policy and decision makers while shaping the interdisciplinary, agile, critically thinking geospatial intelligence workforce of the future. Thank you.
How many out there learned something? Excellent, because that was the whole purpose of this. And the whole purpose was to really share awareness of some really critical efforts that are ongoing across government, across academia, and also with the United Nations. So I also want to thank all the people that did provide questions. I'm going to go through them now, and I have one question for the panelists before we start. Do you want me to answer the easy ones and give you the hard ones, or do you want to answer the easy ones? Okay, here we go. So I think, Godfrey, we're going to start with you, and I'll lob you a softball. Is there a forum where an HDX user can post requests of data, and if so, where? And the second part is, can the data really only be used for humanitarian purposes now and in the future?
At the moment, there isn't that feature, but it is something that is being worked on, where users can request for data. But the HDX is a community sort of project. So we basically are as good as the data that is available in the out there in the community. So if a data set isn't available, chances are those who have that data are not willing for some reason or unable to share the data. And the other bit of the question about whether the data cannot be used for, if I get it correctly, whether the data cannot be used for commercial purposes.
Can the data only be used for humanitarian purposes both now and in the future?
That restriction would then be put in place by the owner of the data, the person that is sharing the data. So with the Creative Commons type of licenses, you'll find most of them are open and allowed use even for commercial purposes. But you do find that there are some data providers that, including also the United Nations, that put that restriction on data sets that they own. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, Brian, there's a couple questions here that you stimulated.
Okay.
The first one is, are the 13 human geography schemas and themes available somewhere for industry practitioners to access? And if not, would you consider making these materials open source?
I think the answers are yes and yes, right? I think we've made it available. Did we put it out on the WWHGD site and Geo platform?
We did.
Okay.
We put it on the.
That's what I thought.
We put it on the worldwide. I'm not sure that it made it to the platform yet,
Right.
because they were still collecting the feedback.
Okay. And then the second part, making it open source. Well, two parts of that, I guess. First of all, yeah, it's open source now. It's out there. You can share it. I guess the other thought I had is interpreting the question as open source, as in editable kind of software, kind of open source. So could we put it out there for it to be edited and improved by you, the crowd? And that's a great question. And I don't see why not. And I think that might be an excellent idea. So so I'll look into that, and we'll toss that around and see what we can do to, because in GA it's all about trying to utilize GitHub to improve data, to improve software. We just put the Hootenanny, a big conflation tool we've developed on conflating vector data, out on GitHub for the crowd to edit and improve. So the thought of putting our operational 13 theme schema out there to be improved might not be a bad idea at all. So thanks for that.
Great question.
Yep.
Nicole, in your comparisons of Africa and Asia Pacific regions, how are your variables chosen?
The variables, it's basically a global analytic framework. So the variables that we selected and to focus on are basically variables that we calibrated against particular case studies. So one of those case studies was the Arab Spring. We looked at 10 Arab Spring countries that experienced differing degrees of unrest in 2011, and then we gauged how specifically did these countries differ from a socioeconomic perspective. Some of the findings that we had was that all of the countries that experienced unrest also had freshwater scarcity per capita, so that was one underlying issue that cut across, as well as the level of oppression was very stark in all of these countries. From there, it kind of diverged into two separate paths, where the sustained unrest was more related to lack of social freedoms and lack of socioeconomic opportunities. And the sporadic unrest, the one that didn't last that long and didn't result in an ouster of the government, that was more resource related. Demographic pressures, urbanization, things like that. So those were the indicators that we calibrated against the Arab Spring. We've seen other incidents of unrest since then. We continuously calibrate. This is the advantage of having an analytic framework, is that it allows you to learn, capture your lessons learned, and adjust as needed if the indicators warrant that. So where we are at this point is basically we have more from the Arab Spring case study to more of a looking at the government's resilience side, which apparently has application in other frameworks as well, and combining that with the societal resource side. So that's where we are at this point, about 2-3 years into the project.
Excellent.
Thank you. And then for Dr. Lutori and others on the panel too, is within mapping secondary cities, have you considered how to partner with Google Maps, use map makers and map ups with Waze editors from the user community, or even how to use their existing data sets of OpenStreetMaps? And I know this might hit some of the citizen science too.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, and we are not looking at any one platform for doing this. We really want to look across the board at all the different tools and resources that are out there. The pilot project is just learning lessons at this point and trying to figure out how to move forward on this, and we plan to go to other places and use other platforms and test it all out and use the best resources in the different places we go.
Anything with the citizen science aspect too?
I'm going to agree with Melinda. We're also platform agnostic, but OpenStreetMap is certainly getting a lot of traction within the agencies.
So did your participants in the citizen science get as many points as my kids do when they report a cop to one of their friends on the same road? So that's the citizen science too that we see at home. How can we improve, this is for the whole group, and it was a topic that came up during the preparation calls, and it was how can we improve the policy related to geospatial information sharing before crisis response and after crisis response? And I know that each of you probably has a little to add to that. Mike, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now being at the University of South Florida, our data certainly is more open, but then I'd also say that we haven't been putting a lot of data out there. I'd say one thing that we probably need help with is marketing, but I mean, you probably see that across a lot of universities, especially new initiatives that begin. I mean, there's even some data that we really can't share necessarily. We still have to go through some of the same processes. So for me to leave the government and think that everything was going to be entirely open, no, it's not entirely open, but it's certainly a much more open environment. I'm aware of the platforms, and we're going to start pushing our data to those platforms. I would like, as far as a way to improve business here, is keep these discussions. Let's have more interactive forums like with the WWHGD. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to kind of sharing the work that you have in progress, putting something on the table to really have people to comment on. If it's not right or it needs help, hey, at least now we have people who can come in and say, I have data, I can help here, and this is what we can do. That's really, I just want to bring the community together in some way, so that way we can push some things forward together.
So on the crowdsourcing front, a disaster occurs and they are very fast to respond, and they will crowdsource the data scramble, right, to search to find the data. There are groups like GIS Corps, Map Action, Standby Task Force, Humanitarian Street Map, I hope I don't leave anyone else, Humanity Roads. So there are a lot of groups, but UN OCHA has been working to coordinate among these groups so that in advance they have some of this data queued up. And then there are groups like Humanitarian OpenStreetMap that are working with local communities to do the crowdsourced mapping in advance for disaster preparedness.
Right. I was also going to touch on the issue of data preparedness, where we would pre-position data, so to say. But another interesting idea that we're sort of that has been floated around is, cannot data sharing be put up as a condition of funding, in much the same way that, for instance, research grants always come with a requirement that the findings from research should be shared with widely with journals. So there's just that idea that is out there that it could help improve and open up data if the sharing of data were also put in as a condition for some of these kinds of funding that are available.
I think data sharing is great in principle. I think that for each of the different situations that happen with respect to a natural disaster, it's going to be unique, and so it's really difficult to be prescriptive about some of this. There certainly are common base layers that would be great to have across the board, but again, we're going to be mapping unique environments and unique events, and I think we need to figure out ways to mobilize quicker and have better coordination amongst all the data collectors in terms of reducing redundancy and really creating robust data sets to manage these sorts of situations.
Can I add to that quick? So UN OCHA had done an in-depth study to look at the data needs for disaster response from in the field, boots in the ground, to all the way up to the back office coordinator, so that they knew what those needs are and what formats and how they use the data best.
So I'm going to put in another shameless plug for the Worldwide Human Geography Data Working Group too, and some colleagues that worked on that. If you go to the website, there's a thing there called the Human Security Taxonomy. Mm-hmm. And that was compiled from people on the ground that did a peer review of actually the data sets that they were after first, and then data sets that they needed to continue to get to recovery. So I just want to put out a plug because your whole group was a part of the peer review that went into that. One of the other questions here is, and I want to kind of toss this out to the group, is there's a lot of work with the crowd, there's a lot of work with OpenStreetMaps, and the work has been outstanding. What type of data could you provide to them to jumpstart those efforts to actually maybe get to some more of the coordinated efforts among some of those groups?
Satellite imagery.
Satellite imagery is one. Any others?
Well, I think kind of related to the question that was just asked before, I think we're all, at least it has been my experience, we're very effective at sharing data when there is a crisis. I think what we're missing out on is looking at areas that are teetering on the brink of a crisis where there's still hope for intervention or less drastic measures could be taken to prevent worse worse developments down the road. I think it is very difficult, not only from a data collection perspective, but even rallying the community of interest to focus on those countries. We generally, in the government, Department of Defense, tend to be crisis-driven, and I think a paradigm shift, in addition to data sharing practices that allow it to be more widely and coordinated, I think is needed to focus on pre-crisis countries, not just crisis countries.
And if I could add too, I can't overstress the importance of accurate and good metadata tagging when you're posting data up, like if you're putting data in GeoPlatform, et cetera, because the better we can do that, the better we can label our data and categorize our data, then that makes it much searchable, accessible, searchable, and discoverable. Because there's so much data sometimes out there and it's not tagged properly according to the regimented metadata tagging, it makes it incredibly difficult to find. So it can be all the data in the world out there, but if you can't discover it, it's not much of value to us.
So I got one last question that I'm going to throw in. One is a comment, Brian, from the crowd. Well, this is a comment really for the whole group, but OGC has done an outstanding job in creating standards for the international geospatial community. Is there a standards group for human geography? So I know that within, Mike, you were part of that, Dr. Schwartz was part of that. Brian, you've got...
Yes, there is. And we're all part of the, whatever it is, the NAS, the NAS compliant. I think it's NAS version 6.0, I think is out there now. So that's the work that's kind of led up to this release of this, operational schema that I mentioned before. But yes, NAS compliant, and that's what we try to go by, and that's what we try to encourage people who are sharing data, posting data to go by. Again, so it's data is discoverable.
And I'd say, from University of South Florida, I mean, I'm bringing that with me, and I'm sharing that with others in the academic community. We speak different languages. There's a lot of great work that academia's done. I've been discovering data sets after data sets. Some of it is just information they haven't really, created geospatial data from. And we're talking about areas that, might be teetering or may not even be teetering. But seriously, I think there's enough information that we could put all of this together. So I know now that I'm in academia, I'm creating this network. I'm trying to make these linkages. I had a phone call with a fellow at the University of Sheffield who did local government area at administrative level mapping for Nigeria. Great work. All right, let's get you hosted here. Let's exchange our guys with you, and let's start to build up our human geography data, our understanding. So, much like what we did when we were in the government, we were moving around and training each other.
So with that, I know that we're standing between you and the closing ceremony, and I think in the exhibit hall. I want to thank all the attendees for taking the time out of your day to come and listen to these expert panels on human geography.